I'm just going to quickly introduce myself. My name is Sarah Lange, and I live in Massachusetts, but used to live in Philly, so I know New Jersey really well, and grew up going to Green Pond, which is way up near Denholm. I've been in the fundraising field since 1989. I've raised $90 million, and I've worked with over 200 US-based nonprofits. So I've done a lot of appeals and a lot of fundraising in my day. So here to share some of my thoughts with you, and also take any questions you have. I've blocked some time at the end for Q&A. So if you have questions, if you could just write them down as you go, and then we'll take them at the end. That would be great. So I'm just going to dive in, and all right.
I found this.
Okay, so today I want to talk about donor motivations, the nuts and bolts of appeal, and follow-up campaigns. So really, any fundraising that we're doing is really extracting dollars from donors. And the thing that I want to say is, a lot of times people come to me and they're like, oh, there's no money out there. Well, in 2019, $449.64 billion was given to charity. And this is not a fluke. Giving has increased in 5 of the last 6 years, and there was a significant increase during the pandemic, including new donors. There was 18% of people were new donors, which was the biggest increase in history. And 2022 giving has already outstripped that of 2021, and giving season has not even begun. So I think we're going to easily get to 500 billion this year. That's my projection. We'll see if it's right. So there's lots of money out there, and 80% of it is coming from people. Does that surprise anybody? No. Some people are quite shocked, but 80% of it does come from individuals, which is why appeals are such an important part of your individual donor strategy. So what is it that motivates your donors? Well, they have a passion about the cause, the issue, the population. They want to do good in their community. Maybe they were raised with a sense of obligation. They were taught to. I know I certainly was raised in a family where philanthropy was very important. Maybe it's part of their religious beliefs. But the top 2 reasons that donors give is that your mission is in alignment with their vision of how they want the world to be. So it's really, really critical that the work that you're doing taps into their heart. The number 1 reason, though, is quite simply because they were asked. So a lot of people are out there, they have good hearts, they want to be good people, and they're needing direction in terms of how to guide those instincts. So a lot of times it's just a matter of asking them to support the cause in a way that's compelling. So those are the number 1 and number 2 reasons. They were asked, and there's a mission alignment. So the truth is that people act out of a self-interest. So nonprofit organizations do not have needs. So the client or the services aimed at change is really the need you're trying to strike. And then your donors have needs. So your donors actually have a need to make the world a better place. And they're exercising that by giving it to you because they can't take on the cause themselves. So for example, I happen to live near the Blackstone River, and all the leather factories used to dump all their dye into the river. And so the Blackstone River is, they've been trying for a really long time to make it swimmable and fishable. And so the original campaign was, make the Blackstone swimmable by 2020. And now they've kicked that ball down the field a little because it's such a monumental task. And I grew up off the Mohawk River, which GE did a great job of polluting. So, if you really care about the quality of water in our rivers, that's not something we can take on by ourselves, right? So we're going to come to an organization that is taking care of that issue and give them our money, saying, I care about this issue. Here's my money. Please do something about it, right? So we as a nonprofit are really that bridge between the donor and their ability to make a contribution to a cause they care about. And so we talk a lot about the mattress, and I'll explain that. When you're going to shop for a new mattress, the one thing you really, 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 really care about is a good night's sleep, right? It doesn't really matter what brand it is. It doesn't matter what color the pillow top is, how many coils it has, whether they're individually wrapped or not. What you really are just looking for is a good night's sleep. And so what we end up doing inadvertently is telling our donors how great the mattress is. Oh, our mattress is so good and it's so comfortable. But what they really want to know is, how are you going to give me a good night's sleep, right? So these issues are bothering their heart, and we have the ability to make them feel at least a little bit better. So what we really need to talk about is the way in which we're providing the transformation or that good night's sleep. And that's really what they want to hear from us, not about the mattress. Oh, my cat has made an appearance. She does this every time I'm on Zoom. It's so fun. Hi, Muffin. Yes, I know. So when it comes to your annual fund, there's certain things you have to understand. Individual giving outstrips other forms of giving 9 to 1. Okay, so that's pretty significant. And 7 out of every 10 people give to charity and support between 5 and 11 organizations apiece. So the real question that you have to answer is, your organization going to be one of them? So 70% of people are already trained how to give. So, when you send them that appeal letter with that reply device, you don't have to tell them what to do. They know, right? And I'm going to tell you right now, the remaining 30% don't bother. They're not altruistically inclined, and you're better off focusing on the 70% of people who are already inclined to give. So 85% of the money given away in this country is done so by families earning $60,000 or less a year. I don't know if that's a surprise to anybody, but moderate and lower income folks give away more of their income proportionally than the wealthy. So that's really good news for us, because we don't need to know Bill and Melinda, right? We don't have to get to know Elon Musk. What we're going to find is that people who care about what we're doing are down the street, around the corner, across town, right? So we get to look around our own communities for people to support our causes. And if we're doing something regional or national, obviously that would expand. But really, if you break down the data, just average people like us are the ones who are the underpinning of philanthropy in this country. So all those billions of dollars, most of it's coming from people like us. Now, obviously, those numbers get skewed by wealthy who give millions, but if you break down the data, it's really just average people. So when you also break down the data, you'll also notice that more than 30% of the giving pie goes to religious institutions. And people think that this just has to do with it being about, being good and God and all that, but it goes deeper than that. So the thing about religious institutions is they ask, and they ask often. So it's part of the culture. They provide a range of giving options. They make it easy to give. So I don't know if any of you go to services where a basket or a plate is passed literally right in front of your face. So it does not get easier to give than that, right? Here's the collection basket. And then a donation of any size is valued. So honestly, if a child puts $1 in the basket, that is valued at, not necessarily in the same exact way, but it's just really valued, and there's a lot of gratitude around it. So, when I work with my clients, I'll look at these things and ask them, how do you score on these fronts? Is giving a part of your culture? Do you ask regularly? Do you ask often? So for example, I went to Colgate University and I played soccer, and I actually got an email not too long ago where they were giving me all these great updates. It was actually last year after the soccer season. And, I was like, oh, this is great. Look at all these young women. They're doing great things. And then they forgot to ask me for money. So I replied to the email and I said, was this a solicitation? Because if it was, you didn't give me any, you didn't ask me for any money. You gave me no directions. There was no call to action. So then they send out a follow-up email, and you had to click 5 times to get to where you could donate to the athletic. And then you had to select women's soccer. I was like, that is just way too much work. So you have to make sure that you ask, and then you have to make it easy to give, right? We don't want to make it so difficult that people feel like they're climbing Mount Everest. So in terms of grants versus individual, it's never either or, it's both, because individual donations are the security net we all need to provide long-term viability. So, you know, foundations can change their direction. Some of them sunset. You know, they don't always have enough money to go around for all the applications they get. So I always advise my clients to really try to focus as much energy on possible as building their individual donor program, because first of all, once a donor is with you for 3 or more years, unless you mistreat them, they're usually with you for the long haul. And then the other thing is that, you know, nobody who gives you $50, $100, $1,000 is going to say, I would like an Excel spreadsheet with a report of how every penny of that dollar is spent. They trust you, right? That's why they're giving you their money. So in terms of, you know, grants, sometimes you have these laborious reports, and their financial reports, there's program reports. So you don't get any of that with your long-term donors because they, like I said, they trust you. So focusing as much energy as possible on individuals is really, really important. And yet robust individual donor programs require time. So you have to cultivate those new relationships and deepen those existing relationships, which is really coming down to dating them, right? You have to go out for coffee and get to know each other, and then work your way up to lunch, and maybe there's like a dinner, and maybe there's that weekend away, right? I'm joking, but it's true. You do have to spend more time together to develop that deeper intimacy. So this is why it's really, really important to have an individual fundraising team. This is why it's so important to have your board involved in fundraising, because you can't date that many people at the same time. It's impossible. So if you have 100 donors that you really want to go after because they've shown their loyalty or have the potential to give at much higher levels than they're giving, you can't do it with just you or even 2 people. You need a team of people who are meeting to strategize, understand what the ask is going to look like, who's going to make the ask, you know, what's the cultivation strategy. And that all requires time. So it's really, really important, if you are going to invest in your donor program, to really get more people on your team. That's going to help you move the needle much faster. So our job as fundraisers is to get as many people to go as high on the giving ladder as possible. So you never want somebody to just come into your organization and give you that one gift, right? Because you probably worked hard to find them and cultivate them. And so for them to give you one gift is not a good return on your investment. So what you really want is you want them to become a habitual donor. You want it to become a habit for them to give to you. So that means that you want them to give year after year. So once somebody has given to you 3 years in a row, they're holding their hand up and going, I'm serious about you, right? So this is where I help my clients really identify money that's being left on the table, because a lot of times these people might give at lower levels. So maybe they're giving at $50 a year, $100 a year. And so they're just kind of quietly slipping under the radar, but they've already decided they want to go steady with you, right? So this is a cue that we often miss. You know, they're not going to jump up and down and say, hey, ask me for more money, right? That's not their job. That's our job. But they've shown you that you are an ongoing part of their life. So, you know, you want to look for, I call those sleeping giants. You want to look for people in your database who are those loyal donors who have been with you for 3 or more years. And those people are primed to move up the giving ladder. And so then the next step is really getting them to give a significant gift. And a significant gift looks different for all of us, and it can vary for your donor year over year. So for example, I've been a single mom since my son was 3. He's now 26. And when I was putting him through college, my philanthropy just took a little bit of a dip, because every time I turned around, the university wanted more money, right? So it was like, really? Didn't I just pay that bill? It's like, oh no, now you need this, now you need this. So for 4 years, I was, you know, at very much a flat line in terms of my giving. So that was not the time to ask me to make a significant gift. So, you know, institutions that know me did not ask me to increase my giving at that time. So the point is really to just get them to up level their giving by a pretty significant chunk. So say they're coming in at $50 a year and they've been giving you for 5 years. Well, I would say they're probably ready to go to 200 a year if they've just been slightly sliding along at that level. And even if they can't make the $200, okay, so maybe they are 150, right? So the whole point is to explore with them, what does a significant gift look like? And at this point, sometimes people have to make a decision between, organization A and organization B, right? So you're really asking them to step more deeply into their commitment. And likewise, you have to step more deeply into your commitment with them. The next stage is really a major gift or a capital gift, and sometimes these can be the same. So a major gift is really when somebody makes a sizable investment in an organization. And so, for example, I recently set up a fund at my local community foundation to support social change issues. And so that is a major gift. And I've also given a capital gift when my graduate school was making some changes to make the building more accessible. So those sometimes are the same thing, but a capital gift is really a bricks and mortar investment specifically, whereas a major gift could be for a scholarship fund or some other kind of investment that your organization is trying to make. And finally, the mother lode of fundraising is when you are named in somebody's will, right? So estate planning, it's really important to look at estate planning, who is in your database, in your donor pool that might be ready for that. And the thing about estate planning is, we're talking to our donors about death and money in the same conversation, right? And those are two topics that in the United States are pretty taboo, right? We don't go around talking about death. We don't really tell each other how much we make, what our net worth is. So you have to have a solid relationship with your donor before you can really start the estate planning discussion. The good news is that we don't have to know anything about estate planning. That's a lawyer's job or a financial planner's job. That we do not have to be experts in any of the tools, any of the mechanisms. All we have to do is start the conversation with our donors and say, hey, have you thought about, what charitable gifts you want to give, as you pass on, what legacy do you want to live? So I help organizations start to get their estate planning processes together. I usually recommend like a soft underhand approach. So for example, this one organization, their donors are largely women, and women have very unique issues they confront during the life cycle, one of which is being that sandwich generation, having to take care of parents and children at the same time. So we just did a series of workshops, sort of like, thinking about your future, what do you want to think about with your aging parents, and so we just did this series of like 3 workshops on a Saturday morning. We had an attorney come, we had a financial planner there so that they could actually have their questions answered. And it was really just information session for them. And then we sent them home with a packet which outlined how they could the different kinds of gifts they could leave to this client's organization. So sometimes it's just something as simple as that. And it can get way more complicated, but for most of us, we need to keep it simple because we have 5 million other fires or irons in the fire that we need to tend to. So again, we want people to go as far up the giving ladder as they can. And this requires cultivation and stewardship. So taking care of them and their money and deepening the relationship. That's really how we get people to move. And again, this is not going to be with every single donor. Obviously, you want as many donors to become habitual donors and eventually move to the significant gift, but a much smaller percentage are going to move up the ladder to major capital or estate planning gifts.
Hey, Sarah, I have a quick question.
Sure.
The topic today was preparing for end of year giving metrics to evaluate your end of year fund campaign and example of effective end of year. I just wanted to know if we were leading into that.
We are.
Awesome.
I can skip ahead a few slides if you want. So in terms of annual appeals, more than 30% of donations are made in the month of December and 12% in the last 3 days of the month. So it ain't over till the ball drops in Times Square, right? So people are often scrambling the last 3 days to get those gifts out, to take advantage of the tax advantage. So it's really, really important for us to make a major push during the month of December and not to take our foot off the gas the last 3 days. In terms of frequency of appeals, I run into a lot of people who are a little freaked out by making quarterly asks, but most people don't mind giving more than once a year. And actually, by not asking them to give more than once a year, we're leaving money on the table. So I'm a big fan of at least 2, if not 4 appeals a year. And the other thing to think about is there's a difference between a hard ask and a soft ask. So for an example, an appeal letter is a hard ask. You are sending them a letter, you're saying, I want money, here's a suggested donate rate. It's a direct ask. Whereas you can make soft asks. For example, I was working with one organization, they had never done an annual report. We produced something very simple. It was just a 8.5 by 11, 4-page, lots of graphics. And we tucked an envelope inside, and that mailing brought back $17,000. So one mailing that they had never done, we didn't actually ask for money, brought back $17,000. This same organization puts an envelope in their quarterly newsletter, and that generates $85,500 a year. So that's what I mean by a soft ask. You're not coming out and directly asking them for money, but you are dropping a pretty obvious hint that that is what you would like them to do. So if you're nervous about sending out like 4 appeals a year, I would really encourage you to think about what other ways you can make soft asks, because otherwise we're leaving money on the table. So it's really important to know thy donor. So who are your donors? Do you know? And if not, it's really time to investigate. Otherwise, you're really not going to be able to create effective, psychologically compelling letters, because what you want to do is you actually want to speak the language of your donors. A lot of times we have jargon. So for example, my background is in art, which has its own word salad. Then my graduate degree is in social work, which is a whole nother, like differential use of self, meeting the client where they are, right? So each industry has its own jargon. And a lot of times the jargon that we use as shortcuts internally is not the same language that our donors would use. So I'm a big fan of first doing a donor data dump, which is really when you're doing donor segmentation and analysis. So for example, looking at who are your top givers, who are your most loyal givers, can you figure out the demographics of your donors? So for example, that organization I was telling you about where we did the first ever annual report, we did a donor analysis and found out that the majority of people in their donor base were women who are 50 plus, which is why we immediately moved into an estate planning process. So it's really important to understand who's giving and what are their traits and characteristics. And a lot of times we don't actually know what their traits and characteristics are. So this is why I'm a huge fan about sending out an annual donor survey. So ask them about what they perceive as your strengths. What do they perceive as your areas for growth? Why do they give? That's a big one, because there's 1.5 million nonprofits in the world, in the United States alone, and that doesn't include religious institutions. And then 5 adjectives they use to describe themselves as a person, and the top 5 adjectives to describe themselves as a donor. And then you want to take those words and put them in all of your fundraising and communications material. You literally want to speak their language. You want to use the words that they use to describe their organization, to describe themselves. So one of the words that is often comes back as part of the survey data when I work with clients is generous, right? So you want to affirm their identity as a generous person. So you say your generous contribution, because of our generous donors like you, so you want to literally take those words and use them because you're creating a psychological resonance with them, which amps up their attachment and connection. So I don't want to get into like neuro-linguistic programming and donor psychology. That's just a lot. But by using those words, you're deepening the connection, right? So even if you can't get out and date them, you're still creating that resonance that, oh, you see me, you understand me, right? And when we feel that way, we take a step closer. So it deepens their connection with your organization. So I usually send out surveys in January just because, you know, it's a less crazy time for fundraising. And I love collecting the data and looking at what people are saying. It's fascinating. The other thing you want to do is you want to talk to your donor. So the success of your direct appeal is going to be directly linked to your donor communications. So we need to touch our donors at least 7 times a year. In New England, they say it's 10. But in today's digital world, that is so easy. You could send out 3 newsletters, an annual report, 2 appeals, e-news, Facebook posts, right? We're probably talking to them 7 times a week at this point, but we want to have that constant communication with them so that they stay connected. Because the number one reason donors walk away from you is because they feel they don't matter. Now they'll say it's because they feel like their gift doesn't matter, but it's really because they feel like they don't matter. So the communication really has to be about them, the difference they're making, right? Obviously, they are facilitating our ability to do the work, but we need to place them in the center. So when it comes to your appeal, you want to establish a special look and feel. So it should be in keeping with your organization's logo and brand, but be slightly different. So I always like to do things in weird sizes or colors, anything that's going to make it pop out of the mail pile. Because I don't know about you guys, but I get a bunch of mail, especially starting, the appeals have already started to roll in. And last year I got 135 appeals, mostly from organizations I had no idea who they were. So typically they would come in a number 10 white envelope. They had clearly been prepared by a mail house. And I was like, oh, I know what's in here, right? So the only reason I opened it is because I'm a professional fundraiser and I was curious to see what their appeal said. But, you know, if you're coming home from a long day after work and maybe you just had to pick up one of your kids from here, one of your kids from there, now you got to think about dinner, like the mail kind of goes to the wayside. And so if you have like a weird size or a different color, it's going to attract their attention. It's going to motivate them to open it. So that's kind of why I go in that direction. And then in terms of the device itself, you have to think about the size. You have to think about the amount of white space. What I find is that we try to cram way too much into these letters. And so we end up using like 1/2-inch margins and 10-point font. And that is very tiring for a reader's eyes. And especially, and this is why you have to know your donors, you know, once our eyes are over 50 years old, most of us have to wear glasses. And so it's really important to use what I call, well, it's called a sans serif font. So the font I'm using on this PowerPoint is actually sans serif, right? So it's without all those little tails. Times New Roman is called a serif font. So it has those little tails on the T's and things. That is actually harder for your eyes to read, especially for eyes that are 50 plus. So you want to think about who your readers are and think about that. The other thing to think about is graphics. I love putting pictures, syncing them into my letter. I love using pull quotes. The other thing to know is that people don't read from top to bottom. They skim in a zigzag pattern. So think about how you're using your real estate. So they're going to come across to the right. This is usually where I'll put either a pull quote or a graph or something. Then they're going to go to the left, right? So maybe I'll have either a picture or some bold text or a quote or something. And then they go down and then they go to the signature /PS. So you have to use your real estate really wisely and understand that people they might go back and read the whole letter, but mostly they're going bing, 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 bing to see if they're going to engage. So think about how you use those zigzag points to capture their attention. How do you make it hit their heart through either a photo, graphic, pull quote? So that's also really important consideration is the use of the real estate. I always like to use the problem solution gap. So it's what is the problem that we're trying to solve? You know, are there PCBs in the water? You know, so that's just one example, having grown up off the Mohawk. And then, so what are we doing about it? You know, what transformation are we providing? And then, yes, we're solving the problem to this extent, but this is the gap that still exists, because you want them to understand that, yes, we're making progress and you're helping in that endeavor, and there's still a need, right? And you also want to position them as the hero. Again, you want to make sure that they know that they actually make a difference. And it's also really helpful to tell stories, but keep them human size, right? We want to keep it on a human level, because so many of the issues that we're trying to address are huge and they feel overwhelming. And so you want to make sure that the donor knows that they can make a difference, right? And that you are making a difference, and that they're part of the problem being addressed. So that's why you want to tell like stories. But the other thing you want to do is you want to make it hurt. So I was just working with a group called New Hope, and they provide shelter and services for women escaping domestic violence. And so the letter that they started writing was very kind of like, domestic violence is terrible, and we're here to help. And I was just like, well, that's very nice. I said, but aren't the statistics like 3 women get killed every day in domestic violence situations? And isn't 1 out of every 4 women are assaulted? She's like, yeah. I said, okay, so that's the problem, right? We don't want to live in a world where women get killed by their partners. We don't want to live in a world where 1 out of every 4 women, we all have women we care about in our lives, right? We don't want them to get hurt. So that's what I mean about making it hurt. And then the other thing that we were talking about is they get calls from 18 women a day looking for help that they cannot help. Yes, they can give them services, but they can't give them shelter. And I don't know what you guys know about domestic violence, but by the time a woman gets out, she's already tried to get out 7 to 10 times. And she's leaving because she feels her life is in danger. So these are women who have run through all their resources and are in desperate situations. And they have to say no to 18 women a day. That hurts, right? So I said to her, I want you to do the math. You need to say, we need to turn away 18 women a day, which is this many women a week, this many women a month, this many women, and then say your contribution will help us help them, right? So that's what I mean about making it hurt. The work that the nonprofit sector is doing is so crucial, right? The work that you guys are doing is vital. And so the people reading your letters need to know that. You need to like poke them with a pin a little, right? Because we can't wait for them to provide their support. We need the support now. The issue exists now. And if we don't address the issue, it's going to get worse. So you need your reader to understand that, right? And that's what I mean about like poking them with a pin. Because if we just think, oh, okay, well, yeah, domestic violence is an issue. But when I read a letter that says this many women are getting killed, this many women are getting hurt, oh, and by the way, we have to turn away 18 women a day, that makes my heart hurt. And philanthropy is a heart-centered activity. So we really want to connect with people's hearts and help them understand that this is a problem and it's a problem now. So that's why I really focus on the problem solution gap format when I write my appeals. So here's a chilling example. This was done by my friend Adrian Sargent. And so they did this campaign for an organization. Remember your first period, leaving school, getting married, having your first child. A nanny does, she's 12. Oh my gosh. We all know 12-year-olds, right? This is not what we want for our 12-year-old girls, to be leaving school, getting married, and having their first child. We want them to have the opportunity to go to school, possibly do a secondary education or some other kind of higher ed, not have their childhood robbed from them when they're 12. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about making it hurt. I read this and it makes me want to throw up because I have friends with 12-year-olds and I don't want this for any 12-year-old girl on the planet, right? So this is kind of the resonance you kind of have to reach for. And I know for a lot of us that can be uncomfortable, but this is what's going to move your donors to really understand the issue And when I read this, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. What can I do about it? Right. So it compels me, makes me feel more strongly about the issue. So this is the kind of stuff we want to do. So it's really about figuring out what your so what. What is the compelling problem you're trying to solve? Like, so what? Why should I care about your organization and the work it's doing? Because there's probably other organizations doing similar work. So what's unique about your organization? How does the work of your organization impact and transform the issue? And then why should people give you their hard-earned money, and why give it to you instead of your competition? So for example, this one organization I was working with, their two market differentiators that I figured out for them is they're one of two homeless women's shelters in central Massachusetts that does not require women to be on public assistance when they come in the door. So they are able to meet women from all walks of life, right? Because domestic violence doesn't discriminate. So women from all circumstances can come through the doors of that shelter. The second thing I helped them figure out is they thought of themselves as a women's organization. And while that's true, they're primarily a housing organization. So they have 55 units of affordable housing for women and kids. They are the largest provider of affordable housing for women and kids in Central Mass. That matters to their donors. So it matters to their donors that women from all walks of life can get into the shelter, and that they have the largest facility for women and children in Central Mass. So you have to think about, like, well, what are our market differentiators? What makes us unique in the landscape that we're in? So you really have to think about what your so what. And this is also why a donor survey is so important, because your donors are going to tell you your so what. When you ask them, why do you give to us? That's going to help you understand your so what. But this is really, really important to distill it down to the so what, because that's when you're going to get to the root, and that's when you're going to be able to really drive the messaging home. So in terms of components of a successful appeal, they focus on the ask, repeating it 2 to 3 times. And if it makes sense, then have a specific donation amount. So for example, Abby's house, I figured out that it costs $35 a night per bed per person, right? So that became our number, our magic number for the year. The package has an overall look and theme. So graphically it's connected, it's on brand. They include a deadline. You want to create this sense of urgency again, like these issues are pressing, and they're pressing now, right? So you need the money now, not next week, not next year. You want it now. So you want to give them a deadline. You want to make sure that you're not just reaching out to your existing donor, but you want to find your lapsed donors and reach out to them. Now, the version of the letter is going to be slightly different because they've dropped out of your donor pool. And if we were having this workshop at another time of year, I would say do a donor survey with them first to find out why they walked away. But right now, given the timeline, it's just important to reach out to them and say, hey, we miss you. This is still happening. We need your support. Would you rejoin the cause? So it's basically the same letter, but with like a little twist. Again, using donor segmentation to move people up the giving ladder, you always want to ask them to move up to the next level. So if I'm giving you $50 a year, you want to try and get me to move up to 75. And even if I don't move up to 75, I'm probably going to give you 60, 65, right? So you want to keep moving people up the giving ladder. You don't want to create an environment where people can just become sleeping giants, where they just give you $25 every year ad nauseum, right? Because most of us have more giving capacity than that. So if you don't ask, you don't get. The other thing is, this is something I learned really early in my career, is there's a trick called the second one in, right? So when you see those giving levels, maybe it's 25, 50, 75, 100, whatever the one is, the second one is the most popular check. So you have to decide what's your ideal donation. If your ideal donation is $100, then make that the second line in your choices. And sometimes my clients will be, well, we don't want to discourage people who would give us $25. I said, well, that's what the other box is for, right? So you want to think about your ideal gift and then position it as the second option in terms of giving, because psychologically, people don't want to check the top box because they think it makes them look stingy. So that's why they go for the second one in. So this is we did this experiment actually with an organization who had no idea about this. So their envelope said 25, 35, 50, I think it was 100. So we decided that the ideal gift was going to be $100. We switched the amounts and giving went up by 32%. No one called to complain, but the number of people who checked the second box were like, so it just was evidence of how much money was getting left on the table every year. So think about the second one in. The other thing to think about is timing. Right now is ideally the time to get the letter out because it gets the best returns. But if not, just get it out the door when you can get it out the door. In terms of frequency and number, again, we talked a little bit about this. I'm a big fan of mailing more often and to more people. And again, you want to send out at least 2 direct mail pieces a year. So I encourage people to do it if you've got a fiscal year that ends July 1, I would send out a letter at the beginning of June, just saying, we've got a month to go. We want to raise an extra $50,000 so we can start our new year strong. And so I would say do a spring one as well. Or for, I was working with an organization that, I don't even know how to describe them. They have a youth run farm and then the kids grow all the vegetables and then they take them to a farmer's market and they run the farmer's market stall. So it's like a environmental justice farming program for inner city youth. And so they always send out one in the spring talking about sowing seeds. And so they like use the seasonal language of gardening and farming in their spring appeal. And of course they always have pictures of the kids with like arms full of carrots and things. They just do a great job. The other thing is about your database. It's really, really, really important to pay attention to the integrity of your data. And make sure that you're updating it, maintaining it on a regular basis. So for example, my son has a different last name than I do, but from the time he's been very little, we have had, it's a Jewish tradition called tzedakah, and we just put all this money in the jar every year. I mean, he's 26, so we don't do this anymore, but like if we would get money from the soda cans or a refund from some product or something, we would put the money in the jar. And then once a quarter, he would pick a nonprofit he wanted to give the money to. And we would actually like, take it through to the bank and get like a banker's check. And then we would drive to the organization and he would present the check to the executive director. And we started doing this when he was like 4. And the funny thing is that some organizations have managed to marry my son and I, because they'll be like, Mr. and Mrs. Christopher Kennedy. I'm like, okay, that's a little creepy. Like somehow they don't understand that he's my son and we have different last names. And now they've merged our donor records. And I'm like, this is just not good. So you really have to be careful, and you want to make sure that you have some sort of protocol. So if you have donors that have different last names, but are living in the same household, do you have a protocol for following that? So you don't want like 50 people entering data nilly-willy, because it's going to end up messing up the return on your appeal. So it's just really important. I really recommend doing a cleanup of your data once a year. And even if that means you send out a postcard, make sure you have it returned to you just to clean it up. It's really important. That's the other thing you can do in your donor survey, is clean up your data. Say, this is the record we have for you. Is this correct? But you could also do that with a postcard. So a lot of people say, isn't direct mail dead? And I say, no, it's not. So baby boomers are going to supply 2/3 of North Americans' charity until about 2035. And baby boomers are reliably direct mail responsive. This means they like paper. They like to receive the mail. They like to touch the mail. They like to interact with it, right? That's the way that they've lived their lives, is paper, right? And so for most nonprofits in the United States and Canada, direct mail is going to be by far the best way to find new donors for your cause, as well as ask your current donors to give away. So give again. So I have a lot of organizations come to me saying, oh, we're just going to send an email appeal. I'm like, well, okay, but what is your donor data telling you? Because boomers aren't going to necessarily respond. Plus, I don't know about you guys, but I can get over 100 emails a day easily. And so the chances of somebody missing your email is pretty high. So if you know that you've got a bunch of boomers in your donor pool, you want to make sure you're sending out a physical letter. So online giving is rising every year, but it's slowly. So last year it set an all-time record of about 8%. So when you're thinking about the billions of dollars that are being donated during the month of December, like only 8% of that is coming online, right? So a lot of people are still writing checks and sending in the checks. So again, you just don't want to leave money on the table. So direct mail continues to do the heavy lifting for charities across North America, and direct mail actually drives a lot of so-called online giving. So people are getting the letter, they're seeing the URL, and they're going, okay, I'm going to give online, right? So it starts with direct mail anyway. So it's really important to know that. So in terms of metrics, one thing you can do is measure return on investment, and this is going to determine whether your fundraising effort was successful or not. So, you know, I've written the formula here. So say you spent $2,000 on a fundraising initiative and you raised $3,000, then, you know, your return is 50%. But if you raise 50,000, then or sorry, 5,000, then it would jump to 150%. So this is a formula that helps you understand the ROI on any particular event, appeal. It's not a comprehensive assessment of your success, but it's a good starting point for folks. So looking at your ROI, and obviously the bigger the number, the better. The other thing you want to look at is your growth rate. So are your results staying the same? Are they increasing or decreasing, and by how much, right? We obviously always want our fundraising efforts to result in more money. So it's not just about the money raised, though. You also want to look at the number of donors or participants. So you actually want both numbers to be going up. You want more people giving you more money, right? That's the ideal scenario. So when you compare the amount raised, it's going to help you determine your ROI over consecutive years and determine your repeatability. So for example, say you tried this event, it didn't have a great return. You really want to dig into why it didn't have the results you expected, because maybe you just need to tweak it. Maybe it just wasn't, you didn't give people enough time. Maybe there's some reason. So you really want to do pretty in-depth evaluation before you ditch it, and maybe try it another time before you ditch it. And then examining the number of donors year to year is going to help you market your fundraising initiatives more effectively. So you want to, one of the things that I did at this group, this organization called Abby's House, was every single envelope that went out had a different code on it. So we knew exactly what spurred that donation. And it was really good because it showed exactly where the bulk of the donations were coming from. And they had never done that before. So they actually ended up ditching an entire initiative because it was basically barely breaking even. And they thought it was bringing in all this money, but that really wasn't what the data showed. So we ditched it. You also want to look at retention. Retention is so important. We can lose up to 30% of our donors every year. That's a lot of work. So how many of your donors engaged with the organization for the first time? How many people came back? And when you look at these numbers, it provides insight into what donor communication strategies are working and whether your nonprofit has opportunities to grow. So really looking at how many people are sticking around. And again, this is where donor surveys can be really, really important. And then in terms of acquisition, which is finding new donors, this allows for more growth while retaining your donors is more cost effective, right? So if you have somebody giving you $100 a year and they end up walking away, you're now going to replace them with what I call a baby donor who gives you 25. Well, you've just lost $75 on that one donor. So you want to make sure that you're doing everything you can to retain your existing donor base while acquiring new folks, right? So, if your organization has a high retention rate, then it's time to invest in acquiring new donors. But if your retention rate is low, that's when you want to strengthen your existing relationships, because those are people who already have shown that they believe in you. The other thing to look at is the average gift amount, and this helps you understand donor retention and acquisition success. So it's a pretty simple formula. So if you've raised $50,000 from 100 donors, the average gift is 500. And then you can compare this year to year to see if you're getting larger contributions over time. However, you may have gotten a weird donation, like somebody left you a bequest of $20,000. So you don't want to plop that into the pool, because that's going to completely skew your results. So if you did get some really large scale one-time donation or something like that, you want to make sure that you pull that out of the data pool. If you want an even more accurate figure, you want to divide your contributions into small gifts, mid-sized gifts, and major gifts. And again, you have to figure out what those numbers are. And then use these results to improve your fundraising asks within each segment. So you always want to get the average gift amount to go up year over year, but you have to know where to start to begin with. The other thing to look at is your conversion rate. So how many supporters acted upon a given call to action by donating, volunteering, or otherwise engaging with your nonprofit. So if you send an email to 100 folks and 30 of them signed up, you have a 30% conversion rate. So this metrics help you identify effective marketing strategies, but it's also important to remember that, you want to do multi-channel marketing. So conversion rates are going to help you decide where to put the most effort into each one. Is it email? Is it Facebook? Is it Insta? Maybe you have a huge TikTok following. I don't know, but looking at the conversion rate is really important because, this happens to me frequently. I will be at a conference doing giving a talk, and someone will come up and say, should we be on Twitter? I'm like, I don't know. Is your ideal donor on Twitter? Like, where are your donors hanging out, or your prospective donors hanging out? So, maybe Twitter is a complete waste of time, maybe it's not. So you have to think about where your people are hanging out and how to get to them. So follow-up campaigns are crucial to success. So once your letter is in the mail, it's just the beginning of your year-end campaign. So in the weeks following your letter, all the way up to December 31st, the first thing I suggest doing is sending an email with the contents of your letter, preferably with like a special banner across the email so they know it's different. You also want to make sure the subject line is capturing their attention. Be our hero, open this email to find out how you can be our hero, something like that. Because even if people got the letter in the mail, it's not going to hurt to send them a duplicate via email. So that's the first thing I recommend. I would say post to social media at least once a week through November, focusing on the needs, getting testimonials, stories, how close you are to reaching your goal, donor shout outs. I love short videos. People love videos. So you could do one from your executive director. You could do one from a board chair or a client. And then you want to duplicate this content in an email and send it to everyone on your list. Again, people sometimes worry like, oh my gosh, if they see the same thing in an email and then on social media, aren't they going to get mad? Well, if we think about our own lives, I miss a lot of stuff that's up on social media. I sometimes miss my email. So I think that it's very rare that A, anybody's going to see all of the stuff you're putting out, and B, that they're going to get irritated by it. So duplicate the content, send out that email. And then I love conducting phone-a-thons on Giving Tuesdays. I get boards of directors involved. We give them like, here's the donor name, here's their the number of years they've been giving, here's some giving information. Anything that we know about them, we put them in the notes. And boards love this. Even if they don't connect with a person on the phone, they can still leave a message saying, hey, I'm a board member at this organization, and I just want to call and thank you for supporting us. And it's Giving Tuesday, and obviously you want to provide them with a script, but board members love it. People love it. And what's very interesting is you can always watch the donations go whoop, after a phone-a-thon. So that's how I like to use Giving Tuesday. Obviously there's a million campaign ideas for Giving Tuesday, but I think a phone-a-thon done by board members is really effective. The other thing that I love to do is called the story postcard campaign. So you can send one postcard a week to everyone, or send a postcard to everyone who has not donated by 12/15, reminding them to donate by 12/31. So you could do a physical or digital postcard, include a link or a QR card. So a story postcard is really just a postcard, and on one side is a picture, and then on the other side is a quick vignette of like a success story, and obviously their name and address and stuff. And then, you know, some kind of link or QR code under the story. But it's like a very quick physical, like visual piece that's compelling. And especially if you're sending it to folks who have not yet donated, by 12/15, they've heard from you a lot. So this is where I would say, make the story hurt, right? You want to compel them to give in the next 15, 16 days to your organization. So the postcard has to be a little edgy. I'm not saying club them over the head, but, you know, poke them with a pin. The other thing is, you know, text to donate is another thing you could do, a campaign. Obviously, this requires their phone numbers, but you can ask for during donor surveys. You could do like a Venmo QR code. So those are just some of the ideas I have. If other people have other ideas, you could pop them in the chat. That would be great. So I just want to go over the Buy a Bed campaign, which we did for Abby's house. So the concept was that it costs $35 per bed per day to house somebody at Abby's house. So this is the math and how I got to it. So we thought that by implementing a fundraising campaign with community groups who have already had some connection with us, we hope to raise $35,000 in FY13. So to achieve this goal, we were going to distribute inexpensive yet distinctive buy a bed containers to community-based groups by town, and encourage them to raise as much money as possible for a 1 month period. So each town had like a town captain. So we obviously only went to towns where we had connections, and preferably either a board member or a volunteer, or, you know, like a solid donor to be a town captain, who followed up with local participants and provided support, encouragement, answered any questions. And we ended up using Chinese takeout boxes, which we created a distinctive Buy a Bed sticker and sealed at the top with clear tape. And then we had a slot cut into it. It's obviously a volunteer job. And then each box had a number on the bottom so we could track who had which box. So we had a kickoff in each location in each town, and we showed the Buy a Bed video and explained the campaign, distributed the collection containers, obviously writing down who had which one. And then at the end of each month, we invited everybody to come to Abby's house to tally by their group, how did each, because we like gave prizes away to the people who raised the most money, and they were very silly prizes. It's not like we invested a lot of money, but they could meet other groups, which was really cool because they could see other people who cared about Abby's house and were already invested, and also to celebrate their accomplishments. Or in some cases we would return to the kickoff site to do it, and it's really dependent on what the town captains preferred, but obviously most of these events were on weeknights and evenings, or weekends and evenings. So we got so many people involved in this campaign. So we put together a Buy a Bed committee, which was comprised of boards, volunteers, and corporators, and any staff that wanted to join us, who helped with kickoff events, container distribution, and the count up process, figure out how much money we made. So there was a parallel effort to promote Buy a Bed. So we did a 45-second trailer that appeared on Facebook episodically. We had part of the website dedicated to the Buy a Bed campaign. We sent that link to our, via social media and email, along with campaign updates. And then that trailer actually linked to a 2-minute video. And it was actually an interview of all the different women who were at Abby's house. And it was a tearjerker. I mean, like, I was standing there as the film crew was working, and I was just bawling listening to these women. So there were some interns that had shot some video, and so we did some some work with that. And then we did a bank and credit union campaign with a buy a bed theme. So we promoted the buy a bed campaign in the newsletter and then pitched the media outlets at regular interviews. So this was kind of what we were looking at, the different amounts: 5 beds, 10 beds, 25 beds, 50, 75, 100. So you can see where we had a specific amount of money that we were looking to raise, for chunks of beds. So we developed this insanely detailed week-wide, it was like a year-long campaign. So we had this week-by-week timeline about social media posts and town kickoffs. And, we had like 6 different waves of kickoffs. It was like every other month we were doing another series of kickoffs. So other issues we addressed were like the Facebook and the email scheduling, the spring newsletter deadline, which was going to focus on, buy a bed, and then creating a schedule for pitching stories to local media, and then creating a schedule for the colleges to get involved. So obviously the school year for colleges is different than, the schedule for the rest of us. So we had to take advantage of certain periods of time. So that's an overall campaign. It's a little different because it was a year, but we actually ended up raising $85,000. So it was pretty successful, and they're still doing it. So even though it started in 2013, it's just kind of become a regular part of the culture. They don't do it as extensively, obviously, but the people who were there from the beginning just automatically start collecting money for, buy a beds, especially around the holidays. So that's what I have for you guys. What do you have for me in terms of questions?
Sarah, I have a question. This is Denise Lanza. I work for the Morris Park Alliance, so we support a park system. One of my challenges is always that problem statement. I mean, I guess if we weren't here, the parks would still be here. There would still be things going on in the parks, but we fundraise for amenities and extras and, support of programs and things like that. But quite honestly, if we weren't here, the park probably wouldn't be as much fun, but it would still be here.
Right. Well, you're the more fun people then, right? Who doesn't want to have fun? Right. So what I hear you saying, it's you add another level of quality, right? You bring in this fun. So I think you need to think about like what is so what I'm thinking, the parks are the cupcakes, you're the icing and the sprinkles, right? Cupcakes are nice, but they're so much better with frosting, right? So I think for you, it's thinking about like, what's the frosting that we bring to the cupcake that's already there? Because obviously, like the parks are obviously going to be there. Like we have parks here in Worcester, but if somebody's not, so for example, the park is just going to sit there, but I know there's some nonprofits in the area that bring youth programming to the park. Okay, well, think about like, what are those kids going to do? Where are they going to get their breakfast and lunch? Because they work with the school system to bring, free lunch and breakfast to the sites for these kids.
Right.
So these kids might go hungry. They might not have enrichment activities. Maybe they're sitting in a hot house all day. Well, okay, now we're looking at things like obesity. Maybe there's some enrichment that happens at the park. So you're not having that, what do they call that? Summer learning loss, right? So those are the kinds of things you want to bring forward is, okay, the park would be there. And here's what we bring to the party, right? So think about all those pieces that are important. And I would also think about like, what happens if it's not there, right? So, if the kids aren't outside and they're not connecting with nature, and okay, well, does that mean that means we don't have environmental stewards of the next generation, or they're at home locked inside in front of a screen? Well, we all know what increased screen time leads to, right? So those are the kinds of things I would really encourage you to focus on, because you are making a difference. You're increasing the quality of the park experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, Sarah. This is Caitlin.
Hi, Caitlin.
I have a question for you,
Sure.
because I liked your analogy and I liked when you said, don't talk so much about the mattress. We do our appeal, but we also do, I guess what I'll call like a companion piece that kind of is a list of accomplishments. And we always make sure we say with your help and make it like very donor centric. And I think there's like a subtle nuance to, are we or are we not talking about the mattress? And is it as simple as, okay, list all your accomplishments, but then return it to, and this is how they're solving the problem. I'm worried that sometimes it just comes off as, hey, are we patting ourselves on the back? Maybe we need to cut down on some of that list, but we've always been focused on the donor needs to feel some return on the investment of their hard-earned money. But can you talk about when you are and aren't talking about the mattress and instead talking about solving the problem?
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you right now, donors don't give a hoot about the tax deduction, right? Every survey that you ever look at that asks donors why they give, nowhere in the top 10 does it say, because I want a tax deduction, right? So they're giving from their heart and they want to know that they're making a difference. So when you're talking about the accomplishments, you can say, you're our hero and here's why. Here's all the amazing things you made happen this year. And okay, if I'm giving you $25, maybe I can't claim that I did all of that, but it still makes me feel like, okay, I can only give you $25 right now, but I feel seen and appreciated, and I feel like I matter to this organization, so I'm going to keep giving. And this is where you can use your cultivation and stewardship strategies to bring people further into the fold, right? Because where the heart goes, the wallet follows, right? So it's really about just celebrating with them, and having that air of celebration, that accomplishment piece. Like we're sending you this letter because we want to celebrate everything that we've made possible, and you've made possible this year, right? One year I did a piece like that. It's a local organization, and we actually, those cartoony bam pow like graphics, we actually used those in the letter, and it was very cartoony, and it was like kind of silly, but it was like, you're our hero. And every time we made a point, we had one of those little bam boom, and because we knew the donor base had grown up watching like superhero cartoons and stuff, right? That's the era they were from. And so people actually were calling the organization going, I love this letter. It was so good. People on the board were a little nervous because it was a little goofy and a little cartoony. But the donors loved it. It was just like, oh my gosh, it took me back to my childhood, and Batman and Robin and superheroes, and because it was that point of reference, it made them feel like a superhero, right? So I would just suggest coming at it from a very celebratory kind of place, right? Let's celebrate everything that's happened, and you made this happen, and we appreciate you. And again, that's going to cement their connection with you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any last questions for Sarah? I know we're over time. Thanks everybody for sticking around. In case you have a question.
So this leads me to my final slide, which is that I am here to help. I'm always available. If you have a question, if you want me to review your appeal letter, or if you want a copy of the ebook I wrote called the Ultimate Appeals Playbook, here's my email. Send me an email, let me know what you need, and I will help.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate
Thanks
all
for
your
having
time.
me. Bye.
Bye, everybody.